Hi, my name is Jane Scarf, and I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I want to talk to you today about the Trespass to Property Act as it applies to these non-essential businesses who are requiring the vax passport. And the reason I felt I needed to do this is because there's a lot of invalid legal information going out there from some of the freedom fighters that are wanting to make a difference, like they want to fight back, but they're not using the correct legal stance. And by not using the right legal stance, they will likely end up with a trespass ticket that they have no defense for. And they're conveying this information to others, and others are picking it up, and some are getting fines and some are not getting fines. Also, it's been suggested by several that go in a big group and do it up, and that's not a good idea. It may avoid some ticketing. If 2, 3, 4, even 5 cops show up and you have 30, 40, 50 people, obviously you're not going to get too much legal ramifications with that. But we're trying to make a difference. We're trying to reverse this. We're trying to confront it in such a way as to get it to stop. So by doing that, you're just opening yourself up to eventually being charged, again, with no defense. And with these large groups, you also run the risk of being charged for disturbance, charged for common nuisance, and depends on the size of the group and what happens. If there's rowdiness and stuff, they could say that it's a riot because it's on private property, not public property. So there's no right to assembly, right to protest, all that out the window. That only applies to protesting towards the government and government property. So specifically, what's being stated is that because of the Healthcare Consent Act, we have a right to protection from medical treatment that we don't consent to. Now, that is correct, and that is what is in that act, and that's important for people to know that. But it's not a defense for trespassing. You have to deal with that elsewhere. You have to deal with that. It's a violation of your rights. You have to go to court or some other avenue because the police don't have the discretion to hear your case, what your case is about. So breach of privacy also is happening with these vax passports. But again, that's not a defense for trespassing. And later on down the road, if you go to court, you can't say, well, whatever. Those things don't work as defense, not on private property. And even a mall where the public is allowed in, it's still private property. And I'm going to read you, and there's a little bit of a misconception about who is trespassing or how they bring that about. So I'm just going to bring up the act and read the sections. I'll first read the section that applies in these cases, and it's 2(1) (b). And it says, somebody who does not have a right to be on the property. Sorry, no, that's not how that works. It is just somebody who does not leave the premises immediately after he or she is directed to do so by the occupier of the premises or a person authorized by the occupier. And they're guilty of an offense and are liable to a fine of not more than $10,000. Now, they're not normally that high, but they could, if it's something persistent, they could bring it up that high. But it's not necessary to end up getting a charge that you can't defend yourself for. There's other ways that this could be dealt with, that would give you a defense. If it's the non-essential businesses that are being required to enforce the regulations, the regulation 264/20, which is basically the Vax passport. So if they're enforcing that, that's law enforcement. Now that changes the whole dynamics of everything, because the person who's acting as an agent, as a law enforcement agent, is covered under the Criminal Code of Canada, Section 25(1). That's talking about peace officer or public officer designating a private person to enforce law. So that being the case, there's federal regulation governing that individual. And that being the case, Canadian Bill of Rights applies. So they can't willy-nilly remove you with no reason, because now they do have legal restraints from doing that. And specifically, I'll get into that in a minute, because I'm just going to talk about defense first of all. Okay, so then I'll mention also that these passports are also criminal offenses involved in them, but I'll leave that for now, because that's not a defense even, but this is a defense, because the passports are violating Section 1A of the Canadian Bill of Rights, which is the right to privacy and the right to informed consent. That's in security of person. And then also 1B requires them to treat everybody equally and protect everybody equally. And that's not being done. They're treating some people differently than other people. And without a good reason, by the way, because there's evidence that vax people transmit the virus at the same rate as unvaxxed people. So this isn't about protecting or making anything safe, and that's a pretty standard. They can't pull the public health card on the whole deal, and that gives you a defense, because the removal, like if they remove you by police and give you a ticket, that's an unlawful removal, and it won't stick, and that's pretty much the only defense that I can think of, because, there's one more. there's another defense, but it wouldn't apply. It's if you think you have a right to be there, and not a right to be there as a customer. What they mean by that when they say a right, it means that you would think your lease is still valid or something, and it's not, or you think the property, the deed has been, or the purchase has been completed and it hasn't been. So you think you have a right to be there, but the actual owner or the actual occupier can ends up in conflict with you. And at the end of the day, if you're in court, that's a good defense. Like if you had a good reason to believe that you had a right to be in there, then that's for once, only once. That's not going to change the whole problem that we're having or anything. One time when you go to court and they tune you in and you don't have a right to be there. That's the only defense. Otherwise, it's just like a parking ticket. Your car's parked there, it's no parking, there's no excuse. There's no excuse that's acceptable. Like you can say, it's so ridiculous that I saw an elderly man rush his wife that had a heart attack to the hospital, and he parked just temporarily till he got her in. Like he's rushing her in. He didn't have time to go looking for parking, so he parked her right in front in the disabled spot, and they gave him a $300 and some ticket. And then he tried to explain, like, when my wife's that regard. Nope. They didn't even reduce it. They $350 fine. Now sometimes they do, they'll reduce them and stuff like that if they think the reason's good enough, but they don't have to, and they don't always do it. And it's the same with the trespass property, what I just read you. If the owner says, get out, you have to get out. Otherwise, they have a right to have the police escort you out. And the police may or may not give you a ticket. It's up to them. It's their discretion. But they're really supposed to, by the way the act reads. And what was I going to say next? Oh yeah, separate and distinct from these arguments that I just put out. When the officer comes, you can make a complaint that they've used uttered threats, because they're saying, if you don't show this passport, we're going to throw you out, and they are actually doing it. So it's not even just an idle threat; it's one that they are executing. And then it's also extortion. Extortion is when anybody tries to make anybody else do anything that they don't want to do through intimidations and coercion. So extortion. And then there's another one, inciting hatred, and they are definitely doing that, because there's a public campaign, and even doing the passport, that's out in public. So it's stigmatizing and ostracizing, and treating as though that you're irresponsible, and we don't want you here, and whatever, which is normally how you treat somebody that's made grave transgressions. So that definitely qualifies there, but that's not a defense. Like, you can't say, well, they're doing criminal offenses, so I'm not trespassing, or you can't convict me of trespassing. You still can. And there was one more point that I was going to make about that. Well, just that it's oh yeah, the other arguments that I mentioned earlier, they were trying to say that where the Trespass Act says if somebody has a right to be there, they're just taking that to mean any right. Like they use the Health Act, and it says in there that they can't coerce you to have medical, or force you to have medical treatment. So they're saying, there, you have a right, and so they're trying to violate that right, and so they can't use the trespassing. And one has nothing to do with the other. It's apples, oranges, grapes, bananas. Like, it's not, it doesn't apply. Trespass is arbitrary, and the only exception would be, like I said, if it's government, because the government has the responsibility to treat individuals fairly and reasonably. So it's not fair or reasonable to say you can come in because you had a vax and you can't come in because you didn't have a vax, especially since having a vax or not having a vax does not change the rate of transmission. So there was one other item I wanted to bring up. Well, and okay, so I'll go through, I'll highlight. I do not recommend large groups. That could end up biting you in the ass. It could get out of control, and it could even just be mischaracterized or misconceived. Like they could characterize it as intimidating and criminal charges, or disruptive and criminal charges, or riotous, even if they want to go to extremes, and often they do. So I wouldn't give them the chance. It's not necessary to challenge this and to try and turn it around. It's not necessary to bring in a mob, a flash mob, they call them. It's better if you go in with a normal sized group. Usually when you go out shopping out and about, usually with one or two other people. So that's what I recommend. 3 people go in. That's not intimidating. You've got witness, you've got, people to, they might come up with other ideas as you're presenting your case and stuff like that. It's a good idea to have somebody or a couple of people with you, but then there's no chance that they're going to say 3 people's a riot, or 3 people are, they could say still disruption, but they would have to have, there would have to be cause for that. But just 3 people in itself cannot be characterized as a disruption. and not legitimately. You could defend yourself with that. So the idea is, and also too, when you're bringing up this acting as agent, if you do, you have two choices. You can just raise all the issues, have it on tape that you've confronted them about this, and that their decision to disallow you to have the services if you don't reveal your vax status. You're notifying them or telling them that this is inappropriate, and even if you don't go to the step of having them call the police, you can still go forward with that because you've taken your position in full, and they're acting illegally. So then you can start with the privacy complaints and the if you have exemptions and they're not honoring the exemptions, you can do. Although the Human Rights Commission is not my favorite place right now, but you can. You can actually sue somebody for breach of privacy. So you have the option of going that way, and if your total amount you're seeking is less than 35, you can go to small claims court, which is advantageous for many reasons. One, it's very quick, and it's not as complex. It's deliberately reduced complication, and the costs, if you lose, are capped, severely capped, and they're capped at roughly 15% of the claim that you're making, whereas in Superior Court, that's not the case. And it's shorter, quicker, so it's much more desirous to do that. And then Rebecca and I are recommending that if you want to pursue them for liability, you can also create a debt and start collecting the debt even before you go to court. And you can use Equifax, you can use leaning their home, calling them every day, or hiring a company to call them every day, like, where's my money, where's my money? Violation of your rights, which would also include the criminal code violations, are roughly 5,000 each. So a right to privacy, a right to informed consent. Then the criminal code violations would be, and actually there's a violation of 1B, which is your right to be treated, having equal benefit and equal protection from the law. So then your criminals would be uttering threats, extortion, and what's the third one? Inciting hatred towards a specific group. So this is I can't answer the questions and talk at the same time. So what I'll do is, after I shut this down, I'll answer the questions. And please, if you're believing this and you're wanting to go out and get some action and some liability happening and some pushback happening, do it correctly, or it's gonna bite you. So that's it for the day.